a park named for a French engineer, a memorial with a biblical inscription at a Buddhist temple in Tokyo, a ship encased on land, 2 tiny Pacific islands, and carvings on a newel post. So what do any of those things have to do with the history of the United States Navy and the history of Japan? For that, we need to start right here. The waters off of Kurihama, Japan. Hello, I'm Rear Admiral Brian Fort, Commander U.S. Naval Forces Japan, Commander Navy Region Japan. Welcome to our 2021 commemoration of the Battle of Midway. Our historical journey today starts right here in Kurihama. This is where the history of the United States Navy and Japan, specifically the city of Yokosuka, start to intertwine. Welcome to Commodore Matthew Perry Park. On July the 8th, 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry and his squadron of 4 ships anchored just off the shores of Kurihama. Perry's mission? Deliver a letter from U.S. President Millard Fillmore to achieve 3 objectives. 1, an agreement to protect American seamen who were shipwrecked in Japan or driven ashore by typhoons. 2, establishment of coaling and resupply stations in Japan. And 3, most importantly, open trade with Japan. Perry was remarkably successful. In fact, with the signing of the Kanagawa Treaty less than a year later, on the 31st of March, 1854, Perry and the United States Navy played an important role in transforming Japan into the modern world. Perry's influence can still be seen throughout much of this part of Japan. In addition to Perry Park and its museum, Perry's image can still be seen on signs in Kurihama, on murals just up the road in the town of Uraga, and even on the manhole covers in the city of Yokosuka, where the 7th Fleet is forward deployed today. Of course, Yokosuka was a Navy town long before the arrival of the U.S. 7th Fleet. Looking across the water at Fleet Activities Yokosuka and the destroyers behind me, I am reminded that I am standing at the place of the man who played a key role in the naval development of this area. I'm standing at Verney Park. Francois Verney was a French naval officer and engineer. With the arrival of Perry and the opening of international trade across Japan, the Japanese government immediately set out to modernize the country. Part of that modernization was the establishment of a naval shipyard and naval arsenal just across the water here. In collaboration with the French government, Verney led that local effort. As a testament to the construction excellence of the day, we just celebrated the 150th anniversary of Dry Dock 1, right behind me, still in use today. With the establishment of the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal and Ship Repair Facility, and of course the broader Meiji Restoration in Japan, U.S. Navy ships became more commonplace in Japanese ports, specifically our Asiatic Squadron, stationed throughout the Western Pacific. While more ships on the waterways of Japan certainly brought more trade, it also brought more maritime congestion. Here in Yokosuka, one of the more tragic pieces of U.S. Navy history is the collision of the USS Oneida and the British steamer the Bombay. Oneida was part of our Asiatic Squadron, stationed here from 1867 to 1870. On Oneida's final night leaving the port of Yokohama, she collided with the Bombay, just in these waters behind me. The night of the collision, 61 sailors were rescued by Japanese fishermen. And as written in this monument behind me, 125 U.S. sailors lost their lives. The U.S. government at the time sold the salvage rights to a Japanese company. At their own expense, the company also recovered remains of many of the 125 sailors who drowned. Buddhist monks then held a special ceremony at the Akagami Temple in Tokyo, where the remains of those sailors are still interred today. At the temple, there is a memorial tablet with an inscription from the Gospel of Matthew. It reads, "Inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of my brothers, you have done it unto me." A more modern version of that memorial was placed here at Fleet Activities Yokosuka in 2010. At the turn of the 20th century, both the United States Navy and the Imperial Japanese Navy were emerging onto the world as global naval powers. In 1908, our Great White Fleet sailed right up this channel to Yokohama, behind where the Reagan and the Blue Ridge are today. 10 years earlier, in 1898, our fleet defeated the Spanish fleet in the Battle of Manila Bay, And 7 years after that, in 1905, at the Battle of Tsushima Strait, the Imperial Japanese Navy defeated the Russian fleet. From 1905 onwards, the Imperial Japanese Navy definitely had the attention of other world Navy powers after the Battle of the Tsushima Strait. And while Admiral Togo has a shrine dedicated to him in Tokyo, his flagship, the battleship Mikasa, is right here in Yokosuka, encased on the land. Just to show you the importance of the Mikasa, years later, during the Pacific War, World War II, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz of the United States Navy specifically gave instructions not to target Mikasa, recognizing her historical importance. Following World War I, the naval treaties of the 1920s were not enough to prevent a massive naval buildup around the world. And in a competition for resources, the relationship of the United States and Imperial Japan began to diverge. During this time, Yokosuka was a significant Imperial Japanese Navy base. There were ships, fuel depots, ammunition bunkers, and of course, ship repair facilities going all the way back to Francois Verney. Parts of the base were hidden as well, with tunnels and caves dug deep into the mountains surrounding the base. And of course, there were also Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters buildings, just like this one behind me. And although it says U.S. Naval Forces Japan today, once Fleet Admiral Yamamoto worked here. Not only did he work here, he most likely devised part of the plans for the attack on Pearl Harbor. 4 years later, following the unconditional surrender of Imperial Japan on board the battleship Missouri, GIs and sailors came ashore, unarmed, and got to work immediately helping rebuild Japan. Here in Yokosuka, some of those GIs and sailors left their mark, right here on this newel post in the headquarters building. But what about all that history between December 7th, 1941 and September 2nd, 1945? For that, we have to go to the one clue I skipped. These tiny two islands, Sand Island and Easter Island, otherwise known as Midway. In very simple terms, the Battle of Midway was a naval battle at sea between the United States Navy with the carriers Yorktown, Hornet, and Enterprise, and the Navy of Imperial Japan with the carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. The battle took place in the middle of the northern Pacific Ocean, northwest of the Hawaiian Islands. The strategic focus of the battle had nothing to do with the little islands of Midway themselves. It was all about sinking each other's carriers, with the ultimate winner having a tremendous firepower advantage over the defeated. The battle began on the morning of 4th June, 1942, and in the end, all 4 Imperial Japanese carriers were at the bottom of the Pacific depths. And while the U.S. Navy carrier Yorktown ultimately succumbed to attack, the tide of the war in the Pacific was turned. But Midway was so much more than that. See, even after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt committed to the Allies' overall grand strategy of fighting Germany first. Many voting Americans, however, wanted to fight the Japanese in the Pacific because of Pearl Harbor and to defend the west coast of the United States. Tough call for President Roosevelt. And things were not going well overall for the Allies early in 1942. The Western Pacific was dominated by Imperial Japan. Western Europe was dominated by Nazi Germany, and England was on the brink of collapse. The industrial might of the United States was only just getting started, and so there were simply not enough resources to fight a war in the Pacific and across the Atlantic. Imperial Japan was keenly aware of all this when they finalized their plans for Midway. They knew that if they could at least get a draw in the Pacific, if they could take out the American carriers, they might just be able to force a ceasefire and keep hold of the islands and colonies they had taken. It was their only chance for survival, because they knew that once the American war machine got going on the home front, they couldn't win in the long run. And so they gambled their 4 carriers at Midway and lost on an all-in bet. When American dive bombers hit that 4th Japanese carrier, nobody could feel it at the time, but the force of history wobbled on its axis and paused, if only for a moment. For in that moment, the course of history of the entire world was changed, courtesy of sailors of the United States Navy. Imperial Japan would now be on the defensive. The United States Navy was able to catch its breath, hold what we had in the Pacific, as we readied forces to take the fight to Nazi Germany in North Africa and to the beaches of Guadalcanal. After Midway, the Allied powers had new life, and history had a new course. History is not just places and names and events. History is a living force, an opportunity to learn from the past and collectively strive to be better than we were before. We do that by embracing history and learning from it, all of it, the good and the bad. Monuments and memorials will never be enough. History must be taught well and lived. Today, 79 years since the Battle of Midway, the alliance between the United States and Japan is stronger than ever before. An alliance which has stood the test of time for more than 60 years. And while treaties and alliances are signed by leaders of nations, the real work of alliances happens right here in places like Yokosuka. Places where those of us who live and serve in Japan call our home away from home. Places where neighbors become friends for life. Places where we can embrace the local culture and, of course, the local cuisine. From the arrival of Commodore Perry through the turn of the 20th century and now a century on, the history of the United States Navy and the history of Japan continue to be intertwined by the force of history. Watching this video, you are actually playing an important role in history, the history of our future, by learning from the past. Thank you, aloha, arigato gozaimashita.